Okay, fresh water. So we talked about marine life zones. Now we'll talk a little bit about freshwater life zones. We've actually talked about this quite a bit because these, of course, are the main recipients of pollution. Of course, pollution does affect the marine ecosystem, particularly the coastal ecosystems, but the freshwater ecosystems, of course, get the brunt of it because it's mostly produced on land, precipitates down there, washes off, etc. So they're going to get the highest concentrations, and they don't have the benefit of dilution because, as a professor once said to me, the solution to pollution is dilution. So these type of water systems have suffered mostly from that, as well as certain other things, particularly wetlands have been altered by water diversion, primarily something called dredge and fill, where you can take a wetland area and dig canals into it, and then the dirt that you dig up, you pile up on the sides, and that means then that the water, rather than spreading out over the land, will sink down into that canal, and you make the canal at enough of a grade that it will drain, and you drain that out into the ocean. That's how Miami was made, basically. Prior to the 1920s, there was maybe a mile-wide strip of barrier land that went along the east coast of Florida down to the Keys, and everything else was the Everglades. It encroached all the way up to, like I said, about a mile from the ocean, actually. In that time period, though, Henry Flagler, I don't want to go deeply into the history of it, but one of the things they did was they dug deep canals and drained that whole area, and it had some severe effects on the, there used to be coral reefs that would go up towards, up to Fort Pierce. They're no longer there, and that's one of the reasons why, from all this, the pollution and everything, and the change in the salinity, and all the different factors that altered, have had a lot of effect. Bless you. Then you can, or filled group 5, can you be more, can you explain that more? What do you mean by filled?
Like the water fills it.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
hopefully I'm going to be maybe a little, so the opposite of drained is flooded, which is filled up over the top. So wetlands have to be dry part of the year, and they have to be flooded part of the year. But in this case, it means they stay flooded more than a couple of seasons, and that will kill them basically, or change them into water. Yeah, dredge is correct. That's to dig out. The fill part is when you take what's dug out and you pile it up on the sides and bring up the level of the land, so it's not a wetland anymore. Salinity dynamics. Yeah, this is one I gave you guys in estuaries. I knew this was an answer later. Have been impacted quite a bit by these kind of dredge and fill projects, by the fact that you are altering the amount of natural runoff. That's going to alter salinity levels and things like that. So those are some of the main ways in which these types of freshwater ecosystems. I didn't spend a lot of time on this because we've already talked about the main one quite a bit when we talked about cultural what? Eutrophication. So that's the main way in which we've affected freshwater aquatic ecosystems. Freshwater aquatic ecosystems do go through an aquatic succession similar to what happens on land, and in the way that they're similar to it is based around the buildup of nutrients, although it's not all in the soil, or what they call the hydrosoil, what you would call muck in a lake. But that is what happens. They build up over time. It gets thicker and thicker. If that lake or body of water does not have flow through it, like if it's not a lake that is just part of a widening of a river, or it doesn't have a spring, then eventually that lake will fill in. Now, it may take thousands of years, but it will get more and more shallower, and eventually become a wetland. The stages for this are oligotrophic, mesotrophic, and our old friend eutrophic, but this is a good eutrophic, not the bad eutrophic. This is one that nature does over thousands of years of time, and because of that slow input of nutrients, there's time for natural selection to produce a number of different species to utilize all the nutrients that are in those lakes. So they're actually more biodiverse and more productive than what we usually think of lakes as being mesotrophic, and we don't get a lot of oligotrophic ones, but they're most productive. Although they don't have a lot of big fish because they're packed with stuff. But it's a healthy thing. There's a lot of stuff in there, not like you have with a cultural or artificial eutrophication, where it happens in some cases overnight, and in that same case, the algae and the bacteria bloom out of control overnight. Now, you could make the argument that maybe 1,000 years from now, those culturally eutrophic lakes will eventually become like naturally eutrophic lakes, but we don't like, people don't like to look at that time span and have to deal with that. Fish are a renewable resource. It's one of the few food types that we still get from the wild primarily. Because it's renewable, there are sustainable techniques and unsustainable techniques. And just like we saw with forests, it's not just about how much you take out, but it is about how you take it out. So one of the most destructive and least sustainable types of techniques is something called bottom trawling, where they drag a heavy weight behind the boat with a net that floats up above it. And so they're basically, not only are they taking huge amounts of fish and other organisms when they do that, they are destroying the bottom and destroying that benthic habitat when they do that as well. And that's huge. That's actually been outlawed in most fishing areas of developed nations, but it still goes on in a lot of other parts of the world. Net fishing in general is going to end up bringing in a lot of stuff that you don't need, that the fishing people don't want. That's known as bycatch. And granted, they throw these back, but a lot of them are killed in the process. And in particular, there's certain particular organisms that are going to be most sensitive to this. Any ideas? Those ones would be most affected by being caught in nets and being released, but a lot of times it's too late. Dolphins, mammals, manatees, also mammals.
Manatees are in the
How about
Sharks.
not so much. We look for things that don't have
gills. So essentially,
Turtles,
underwater.
things that need to, of course, get to the surface and breathe, so they get tangled up. There's a good chance they'll get held submerged for a long period of time, and of course they'll drown. So whenever you fish with nets, that's going to be a big problem. Also, one way, of course, to regulate these kind of fishing and stuff as renewable resources, to specify certain species when they're under pressure to not be taken, and also size. Why would it be better to take large fish out of a population? Yeah, Judy?
So the others can grow, the smaller ones can
Grow and do what?
Reproduce.
There you go. So when you got your older fish, they are past their reproductive prime. They're basically just taking things out of the resources and not allowing the younger fish to reproduce as much and therefore repopulate. So like I said, they are renewable, so theoretically, if you stick to the bigger fish and don't take too many of them out, then you will have another group of fish next year to catch every year. But if you go excessively, or you catch ones that are too small and everything, that's not going to happen. So as you might imagine, these rules and regulations are hard to enforce in international waters. All right, excuse me. Finally, we have aquaculture, and that's when you raise in a controlled environment like agriculture, any kind of aquatic organism. Sometimes they're plants, sometimes they're shellfish, sometimes they're fish, nectons to be exact. Although this seems good because it's going to reduce the pressure on your wild populations, they have all the environmental impacts before. A lot of habitat destruction has happened from this type of industry, particularly in mangrove swamp areas around the world, where they've cleared these areas out because they don't put a fish farm in the middle of a field somewhere. They put them usually in coastal areas. They go right offshore, and they basically build like a fenced-in or caged area to keep the fish in. And so it's still for me, please. And so consequently, the fish poop, the fish diseases, excuse me, can all get out of the water. Any questions?
What
You alright?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Destruction of coastal habitats. And genetic contamination. So, just like we talked about with other agriculture, if the tame stock gets out into the wild population, it's going to weaken them. Seniors may go.